G'day everybody, welcome back to the next episode. Today we're talking about iPhones. G'day everybody, welcome back. It's been a long time coming for another episode. I'm very sorry that it's taken so long. No mucking around today. We're not going to talk about subscribers or the lack of, and we're just going to jump straight into it. We're talking iPhones today, and I'm going to show you guys, well, I kind of got on YouTube and there's a lot of videos about the latest iPhone or whatever, and I think there's not enough explanation on, when it comes to the photography side of things, on how to actually use phones, because they've come a long way. Even though I've spoke quite a bit of shit about them in the past, they've actually become really good. And I think at the end of the video I'll probably explain why I don't think they're quite up to scratch with the DSLR, but I'll save it to the end of the video, so stick around. But I'm gonna take no more time here. I'm just gonna start a screen record and then we're gonna go through just the basic thing on how video, slow-mo, time-lapse, normal photo mode, and what all the numbers mean, what all the flashes and stuff, what do they do. I think a lot of people they have really good hardware in their hands, and it drives me nuts being a photographer. You know, people looking around, they don't know how to actually use it. So and there's not many videos on how to actually use it properly. So start a screen record and get straight into it. Just going straight to the camera app, and you're gonna have to excuse the keys on the laptop, because that's kind of where I'm sitting at the moment. Okay, first up, let's just go to the first one on what it opens up as. It opens up as just normal photos, so everybody probably knows about these, the 3 ultra wide, wide, and then telephoto. I'm sure a few more cameras, like later versions of phones, have more than that. There's ones with 5 and 6 cameras, but just a quick touch on all of these things so I don't make this video too long. Wide angle is something, when you put something in the middle, what do we got here? Alright guys, I'm just editing the video here and just realised that Fatmax is probably not the best explanation for something, so I'm going to be re-recording some of the B-roll that sits on top of my normal speaking voice, and I'm going to use Mr. Slim Shady here. So if me talking about Fatmax tapes doesn't line up with Slim Shady here and some of the visuals that you see, it's just to make it a bit easier for you guys to understand. So it'll be a bit of chop and changing. Hope you enjoy the video. With wide angle, what I see a lot of people doing is they think it grabs all the image, but it also distorts something. So if you can see here, it's really distorting the tape measure, especially on the edges. Maybe not so much in the middle, but if you put someone's face on the edge, or even if their feet can look like clown feet. So if you're taking pictures of people, please try not to use the wide angle, like a 1. See how much difference that is compared to the ultra wide. So if you went ultra wide and framed it up the same, you can really see how much it bows. 1, you can bring it back, and then 2, even better. You know, it gives you a bit better of a perspective. While we're still in photo mode, I'm gonna show you a few other things. So that's obviously your lenses. Up the top here, you've got your flash on and off. That's pretty normal. You got night mode. It mimics what a DSLR will do with a long exposure if it was on a tripod. You could do the same with this, or you can just hand hold it, which is pretty freaking awesome. Takes a lot longer to gather some light and it will correctly expose your image. So if you go to this button up the top here, night mode here, you can say off or max seconds. See, 2 seconds max. So that means it's gonna hold the shutter open for 2 seconds. And you go to aspect ratio, square, 4:3, which is what you're watching me through, 4:3, or 16:9 is actually probably what that is cropped to as a video mode. So this is more of a video mode. If you were to video it, like any movie you watch is normally 16:9. So that's what those are. Exposure, so this one here, if you look up in the top left, and also this bar at the bottom, so this is an exposure compensation. -2 is the lowest it goes, and +2 is the highest it goes. So that means it's 2 stops of light. If you're not sure about what stops of light are, go to my camera basics video. It explains the exposure triangle and what all that is. So when you increase this to say 2 stops, and you can see up the top left, there's a little dot there, and then there's like a yellowy sort of thing to show you that it's -2 stops. You see as I play with this at the bottom, it kind of goes from 0 to 2, and then it's just increasing your exposure by 2 stops. That's all that is. Timer, pretty self-explanatory. Just if you put a timer, you could put it on a tripod, press the button, you can have 3 seconds or 10 seconds. It's good for group photos. And then the last one here is filters. I'll probably steer away from those, but you can have a play around with those if you want. And then obviously the last button on the bottom here is the reverse camera. You don't want to see my face because you're already looking at it enough here, so we don't want to see it twice. And then up the top we got RAW. If no one knows what RAW is, it just means you got RAW and you've got JPEG, so it's a whatever picture you capture. RAW is a larger file, takes up more data or more space on your device. Basically give you more color information, so if you were to edit the photo afterwards, if you edit RAW, you'd have more flexibility to push and pull colors from what you captured them as. So say if you took a picture of the ocean in RAW versus JPEG, if it was a RAW file, you could grab the hue of the blue and push it all the way to green or all the way to yellow, and it would cope with that adjustment a lot better than JPEG's kind of like a baked in file. So phone kind of chooses that's the color information, and you seeing blue, it will kind of just capture blue, and you can't really move it far from what it's kind of baked in. But if it was RAW, it would capture all the greens, all the blues, all the yellows, and then you can, after the fact, you can kind of slide around and have a bit more flexibility. If you like to edit landscape photos, or you like to be creative, maybe take your creative ones in RAW and then the rest of them maybe take in JPEG, which is normally what I do. So we got live view up the top here. Live view is just I don't know how it works, but it kind of, whenever you take the photo, it'll take a couple of seconds before and a couple of seconds afterwards, and that allows you to do a couple of things. If I turn live view mode on and take a photo of tape measure, took a few seconds. If you go into edit, go down the bottom and see that little live button, you can choose a single frame. This is good for like if, you know, there's a group photo, maybe there's like a lot of people and you're trying to get everyone to smile, so you can actually pick the perfect moment. That's one scenario you'd probably want to use it in. The cool thing about live view as well is if you come back into this screen here, and then if you click up the top, it'll say live, loop, bounce, or long exposure. So basically it's just a tiny video, and you can do all the different ones. You can keep looping it so it will play back, kind of like a boomerang on Snapchat. Bounce is bounce forward and back, I think. And then if you click long exposure, it's kind of the whole thing, and it'll blend all those images together. It's cool for like a short, it's still a short exposure in my books because I'm used to taking landscape shots. It's a cool feature, but it's not enough of a long exposure for me, because when I take shots of landscapes, sometimes I might leave the shutter open for 2-3 minutes, maybe more. So like, it's a cool feature, but I wish Apple would at least try to extend this. I know it's reasonably difficult because you'd have to have it on a tripod, but maybe that would be a good feature. Otherwise you have to use other app, which is kind of annoying to come out of the generic sort of camera app. Apart from that, I think that covers just the photo side of it. If we go to video, same thing, you got flash up the top. We got HD and 4K, which is just a resolution of what it's capturing. So HD is 1080p or 1080, just sort of like your generic TVs, and then 4K is a 4K TV. It's the exact same thing. The difference is obviously file size. 4K is 4 times the amount of data. So a 4K screen is literally 4 1080 screens, like 1080, 1080, 1080, 1080. The reason sometimes why you'd want to film in 4K over 1080 is not specifically to upload it as a 4K video, but it allows you for you to crop in and out. You could create a video at 1080p that was filmed in 4K, and you can kind of downsample the 4K to 1080, and you could kind of, if you imagine, you could just, instead of zooming in and out with different lenses, you can actually digitally, you can zoom into a quarter of the screen and it will still be 1080. So that's why a lot of people rave on about 4K, and now there's 8K, which enables you to film in 8K, crop into 4K, crop into 1080. So you can see the power of the difference between 1080 and 4K. The 30 and the 60 next to this, and the 24, they're the frames per second. So just think about it as, with the DSLRs, they'll film in like 24 frames a second. So that's literally, for every 1 second of video, there's 24 frames, and vice versa if it goes up to 30 or 60 frames a second, and you've got your resolution there. So obviously, if you are at 4K 60, that's like high resolution, high frame rate. So for every 1 second of video, there's 60 pictures and they get played back at other 60 frames a second, or you can, I'll get to that in a minute, but that's something to do with slow-mo. Talking about slow-mo, let's go across to slow-mo. So same thing on the top here. So you've got HD, and there's only HD with 240, and then you've got, oh, it's actually only HD. HD 120 frames a second or 240 frames a second. So normally a video gets played back between 24 and 30 frames a second. When you film something in 60 frames a second, you can slow it down to half the speed. If you film the video in 60 frames a second, you can play 30 frames a second and another 30 frames a second. So that's 2 seconds of video. In real life, it's only 1 second worth of video. So that's why slow motion occurs, because you're watching 1 second of real time over 2 seconds long. I hope that makes sense. When it comes to obviously these slow-mo modes, normally if someone was playing something back generally at 24 frames a second, that's 10 times slow-mo. You'd film 1 second of video, you could play 10 seconds of video. You could drag that 1 second video out 10 seconds long, and you would still be playing 24 frames each second of video as that occurs. So the more frame rate, more data, more storage taken up, but gives you the freedom to slow the footage down. Time lapse, pretty self-explanatory. Just chuck it on a tripod and press start, and then when you're finished doing something, press stop, and then it'll make a little video. So going into portrait mode now, this is a really cool one. So this is kind of, it's come a long way since I've been bagging the shit out of iPhones and how they're not very good at photography. This is pretty much all I carry now in my pocket. Obviously, I think my DSLR still does a better job, but just this is doing it digitally versus an actual expensive lens trying to make a background blurry. So basically all it's doing is, it'll just tell you, move further away from the subject. You can kind of pick up, and like normally it's a face, and if you click up the top here, go to edit. F4.5 it says at the moment, and you can drag that to 1.4, and that blurs background digitally, which is freaking awesome. And obviously if everything in focus, you'd go to F16. Those, you might not know what F means, F1.4, F2.8, F16, whatever. Same thing again, go check out my camera basics video and it'll explain what all those F stops or F numbers are. But basically, expensive lenses, F1.4, 1.8, F2, sort of kit lenses that most people have DSLRs buried in their cupboards that they don't know how to use. They'll just have a kit lens that'll be f3.5 to 5.6. It'll be a zoom lens. So, but if you want to get into photography and get your DSLR out the cupboard and buy like a 50mm 1.4, and you'll have some really good results, better than the iPhone. But this is freaking amazing for what it is. Also, just quickly with the, when it blurs, sometimes it doesn't cut out the subject perfectly, so maybe don't always go to 1.4. You might have to find where, you know, it might not cut someone's hair out perfectly, or and it'll start blurring their hair when it shouldn't be blurred. Play around with that, but that's really cool for like kids photos, or just doesn't normally work with two people, because it doesn't look realistic. I don't know how else to say. Because with a real camera, if there was two people and they were slightly out of focus, you know, if one was standing in front of the other, so I'm in focus at the moment. If this was another person's head, that's not in focus. So an iPhone would probably make this in focus and this in focus, and generally it doesn't work like that naturally with the lens that naturally blurs things. So just keep that in mind. And the last one is panoramics. So got a couple of tips for you. So when you take a panoramic, everybody goes, like it says, left to right. Don't be scared to ever take a panoramic upwards. So maybe it could be a really large tree that has really cool like roots coming out the ground. You could go from the roots and you could sweep up. Another great tip I got for you guys is, I see a lot of people, they'll hold their elbows in and they'll rotate their whole body around. And most of the time that works, but if you've got something in the foreground, as you sweep across, say if this was a rock, I don't even know if you can see this, if this was a rock and you were panning across, if where you started the panoramic here, and then when you start taking it over here, the background changes in relation to the foreground as you sweep across, so you might get glitches. So the best thing to do is actually, I don't know, there's 3 lenses here, but generally what I do, it's a bit of a tricky one, but I try to put my finger near the lenses, like in the line of the lenses, and I actually go like this and I actually rotate the camera around the lens, not around your body, because this is not what this picture, it doesn't see the same thing. But if you do this, it's called a parallax effect if you want to look it up. But same thing with the SLRs. I've got an actual special bracket that I don't rotate my camera around the ball head of the tripod. I actually pull it and rotate it around. There's a certain point in every single lens that will keep it in perspective to foreground versus background. Okay everybody, that's gonna be a wrap on this one. Hopefully you found something useful. Hopefully you understand a bit more of your camera now. I'm gonna give you a real quick recap. So wide angle lenses, bow things, don't put people's faces right in the center with all their limbs and stuff on the edges of the frame. That will make it really bowed, make them look like really big hands or clown feet. Use long lenses for people. If you want to use ultra wide lens, I didn't really mention this, but it is good sometimes to accentuate things like landscape. So if you have a small rock or something in the foreground, you could really make that, you know, stretch it right out so it really takes up a lot of the frame. Telephoto lenses more for people. Your video modes, you've got 1080p and 4K frame rates. You've got 24, 30 and 60. You can slow down 60 frames a second to half speed. You got super slow-mo, or slow-mo is what it's called in the camera, but 240 frames a second and 120 frames a second, so 5 to 10 times slow-mo. You got time-lapse, pretty self-explanatory. And then you've got your portrait mode, which is try to stick to one person when you're taking portrait photos, and you can play with that slider. You can go to f1.4, it'll make the background nice and blurry. Just remember to check for the hair, make sure nothing looks too glitchy. And the last one was panos. So remember I was saying about rotating your panoramic around finger on the lens rather than rotating it on your body. And also remember, you're not limited to left, right, you can also go up and down. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell so you don't miss any other episodes that I post. I used to say post one video a week, but big hats off to people that post one video a week. That's hard work. It doesn't seem hard until you try to do it. I ain't gonna take my hat off because look at those curls. All right, I'm gonna get a haircut.